Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Larry Kaufmann, and I'm the Executive Director at the Liberty 21 Institute, which together with Praxis is responsible for tonight's conference. And our topic tonight is, can conservatives reclaim the culture? And it's difficult to exaggerate the importance of this question. Since the losses Republicans experienced in November 2012, conservatives and libertarians increasingly recognize that culture plays a critical role in maintaining pro-liberty public policies. America has traditionally been blessed by what Liberty 21 calls a culture of liberty. And this culture has emphasized personal responsibility and voluntary cooperative efforts rather than government as the primary means of meeting social needs. Unfortunately, this cultural legacy has been eroding, particularly among younger adults, present company excluded. Restoring a culture that is based in and supports liberty is a huge task. Ultimately, sustaining political change requires a change in the climate of opinion, and this climate is increasingly influenced by messages from education, arts and entertainment, and other institutions outside the explicitly political arena. I think it's fair to say that people on the right have been slow to engage these forces, but most now recognize and acknowledge they need to do so. And one valuable metaphor that I think is important for understanding the importance of culture comes from Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychology professor at New York University and a recovering liberal. He recently wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, and that book talks about the moral domain and how it is informed by culture, intuition, and emotion. And Haidt argues that the way to understand the mind is to visualize a tiny Indian riding on top of a giant elephant. And Haidt says that if you want to change someone's, and the Indian in that image is reason, while the elephant represents the passions. And Haidt says that if you want to change someone's mind on a moral or political issue, talk to the elephant first. If you ask someone to believe something that violates their intuitions, they will devote their efforts to finding an escape hatch, that is, a reason to doubt your rational argument or conclusion, and they will almost always succeed. To put Haidt's argument more simply, for most people, emotion drives and reason steers. And this isn't to deny the importance of reason, because how someone steers obviously influences the choices they make in life and the destination where they ultimately arrive. But it's very difficult to persuade someone to embrace small government policies if that person's visceral knee-jerk reaction to those policies is disgust. And unfortunately, that is precisely the type of reaction that much of our culture is hammering it into the public mind over and over again. So we know that reclaiming the culture is a difficult challenge, but we're very fortunate to have 4 people with us tonight who are opinion and institutional leaders in the pro-liberty movement. And they're willing to accept that challenge and offer their perspectives on this issue and perhaps present some suggestions for change. And our first panelist tonight is Sam Karnick, who, like myself, is a principal of the Liberty 21 Institute. Sam is also the research director at the Heartland Institute, and he has a long and distinguished career writing on cultural and political topics. He spent 3 decades in leadership positions in respected national research organizations, directing research and publications, and serving as editor of a prominent quarterly magazine for the Hudson Institute. He's also written hundreds of articles for print and web publications, such as the Weekly Standard, the American Spectator, National Review, Books and Culture, the National Interest, the Washington Examiner, and numerous other sites, as well as for radio and television. Sam is also the editor of Liberty 21's affiliated website, The American Culture. So please welcome Sam Karnick.
Thank you, Larry. I'm tempted to just say yes or no as to whether conservatives can reclaim the culture and just walk off. The evidence will not give us a straight answer tonight. I think we can be sure of that, because it's going to come out of something that Larry brought up briefly, intuition, the heart. Can conservatives, can the liberty movement bring it off? What Larry said about the elections to introduce the topic was spot on. I've been writing for 30 years, as Larry said, about the culture from a sort of libertarian, conservative, classical liberal perspective. And most people haven't been listening. And part of the problem is that there's the conception that the culture is simply there and there's nothing you can do about it. So several explanations have been given in the past few months about, well, why did conservatives lose the culture? Why is the culture so liberal? And these include that conservatives they don't really care that much about culture. They just don't really care much. They're out busy making money, and so they don't want to go make movies. There may be some truth to that, but it seems to me more of a parody of the facts. The other thought is that, well, the arts and the culture, that's something that liberal types like to do. You know, who would expect to see a conservative go out there and become a dancer or something? I don't know. But none of those arguments seem persuasive to me when you get down to it, because there have been great conservatives and people who have loved liberty, who have been deeply passionate about the arts. Obviously, J.S. Bach, you know, Hawthorne, Melville. You can go through the decades. Cecil B. DeMille, Howard Hawks. These are brilliant, great people who just had a passion for the arts, and they happened to be great at it, and they were extremely comfortable in that world. I don't think that that there's anything particularly anti-conservative about the culture itself, about the culture professions, about the arts. One thing that has been offered, though, as an explanation that does have a little bit of traction is that conservatives are locked out of the culture. That you can't get in. They won't let you in because all these liberals that are running the movie studios, these movie studios that are owned by gigantic corporations that are being run by liberals. And it's true when you think about it. Summer Redstone, the owner of Viacom, seems to me to be just about the most horrible person in the world. That said, how would that happen? Well, there actually was a conscious movement of communists and of the Marxist left during the early part of the 20th century to take over the American culture. Seriously, to take it over. You may have heard of Antonio Gramsci. Anybody heard of Gramsci? He was an Italian writer, politician, political theorist, philosopher, sociologist, and linguist. I have to look at my notes to remember all that because that's a lot. He was a founding member and one-time leader of the Communist Party of Italy. And he was imprisoned by Mussolini's fascist regime. Now, Gramsci is remembered for his theory of cultural hegemony, in which he describes how states, governments, use cultural institutions to maintain power in a capitalist society. And Gramsci argued that what the state does is to finance things and to send people messages through the things that it considers legal and illegal that will tell you how to behave, turn you into a capitalist zombie. And he advocated then that the best way to institute communism in free societies was to take over the culture. And they really did try to do that. And it makes a great deal of sense if that's what you want to do. And I think that they were very successful in it. If you look at Hollywood in the 1930s, the movie studios were owned by big corporations just as they are today. The actors and actresses were just as, well, wild-eyed and insane as they are today. And many of them were just as sweet and charming as some are today as well. You just had a wide range of people in that industry, and just as you have today. But what you did have there was the studios realized that their audience wanted a particular kind of thing. And so they gave it to their audience. Nowadays, that's not the case. What you see is, and Michael Medved, the film critic, has pointed this out, that movie studios don't make movies according to the values of their audience. Now, you might ask, well, why do they do that? Well, the fact is that the way the industry works, and I won't talk too much about this, but the way the economics of the industry work are that no matter what they do, they will make money. It really is, it's really that simple, and I don't want to go into too much detail. But the fact of the matter is that if they put out a certain amount of product, it doesn't matter what kinds of movies they are, they will make money. And so they don't care what you think. They honestly don't. What they do care about is what each other think, and these are the people who were brought in by the Gramsciization of our country. And so what you have is the media can set the norms for a society. They can really help do that. They can make people think, for example, that, let's say you don't have a lot of women working outside the home, okay? Well, what the government did in the 1940s in order to get women to work outside the home in order to do the war effort, the government had all kinds of advertisements and movies and things about how you should go to work, get out of your house and go to work. And then what did they do after the war? They had movies and ads and things saying, go home, go back home, because the soldiers are back. So this, interestingly enough, you see how the state uses, how the government uses the culture to reinforce its own values. We're going to find this is an important fact. So clearly the media can help set the norms for things. If they're telling you that it's great to work outside the home, you're going to think, gee, it's great to work outside the home. If they're telling you that it's unfashionable or low status to, let's say, be a Christian, then you know, people on the margin, people thinking about religion will have a little more reluctance to get involved in it. If they tell you that every wicked person in the world is a right-winger, then you're going to find that people are a little less comfortable voting for conservative candidates. So there's a certain amount of connection, certainly, between the culture and the government. Now, but did we really lose the popular culture? Does the popular culture really need to be reclaimed? Is it really left-wing? I would contend, and I have been doing so for years, that the culture is much more conservative, much more a liberty culture than conservatives tend to think, and much more so than liberals would ever want to admit. The fact of the matter is, if you're watching a TV show, movie, reading a book, listening to music, you're certainly getting messages about what's normal in society, what's normal to think, how we look at the world is going to be impacted by these things. Now, in my view, the record is absolutely quite mixed. We are in a condition that I call the omniculture, which is basically, since the end of World War II, the American culture has drifted into a variety of sects, S-E-C-T-S, a variety of sects, where instead of having one common culture that says, hey, ladies go to war, or ladies go to the, men go to war and ladies go to the factories, and then, okay, men come home from war now and ladies go home. We don't have that kind of common culture where you can control the messages. We used to have three TV stations in each city, a few radio stations, which were decreasingly listened to. We had 7 movie studios, of which only 3 were really particularly prominent. And so your messages were coming from a small group of organizations, and that was fairly easily controlled. The newspapers, you could say, well, you had a different newspaper everywhere, but you had 2 wire services. You had AP and UPI. So really the control over the media was very powerful up until World War II. Thereafter, though, it begins to break down and social values begin to break down. So we have a situation that I call the omniculture, where basically in the omniculture, everything happens. Anything you want, it's out there. If you're a born-again Christian, you can play born-again Christian video games. If you're if you're an aficionado of just insanely crazy-sounding music, you can listen to Rotting Christ. It's all out there. Whatever you want is there. So you might say, well, that sounds terrible. But actually, if you think about it, an unsettled culture like that is an opportunity, because what it means is that anybody who has the talent, and the ability, and the drive to move into that culture can make a difference. And the important thing to me, though, is how would we measure then who won the culture? Can we reclaim the culture? How do we know if we've reclaimed it? How do we know if we've lost it? I would say this. The main identifier of a culture of liberty would be something that Larry mentioned earlier: personal responsibility. Frank S. Meyer, who is one of the founders of National Review, and it was a brilliant writer about politics and political theory, pointed out that liberty is impossible without personal responsibility, and morality is impossible without personal responsibility. The reason being this: if you force somebody to do something, they're not responsible for it, and therefore they can't accept the moral consequences of doing it. If you force somebody to do something, then they don't get any positives if they did anything, if it's a good thing, and you can't really hold them responsible if they did a bad thing. So what Meyer pointed out is that personal responsibility and liberty are intimately intertwined. So I would say in the popular culture, if you look around and when you go home and turn on the TV or listen to the radio or whatever you do, maybe read a novel, ask yourself, what is this piece of culture that I'm attending to, what messages is it sending me about personal responsibility? So often you can see a TV show where, oh, it's a same-sex couple, and then conservatives are going to say, oh, there's a same-sex couple in that, let's write it down as negative. But the idea of the show is that this one of the couple has done something wrong, and the consequences were bad, and it hurt not only them, but it hurt somebody else, and so on and so forth. You know how these shows work. Well, in the end, what does it say about personal responsibility? It says a lot. And if it's a positive view of personal responsibility, saying that this is a good thing, then that is laying the foundations for a culture of liberty, a culture where we can all make our own choices. So if the culture is, as I would suggest, if the popular culture is not anywhere near as monolithic and as anti-conservative and certainly anti-liberty as a lot of people would say, and maybe as my fellow panelists will be saying in a few minutes, if that's not the case, then where's the real problem? Why is it that people would look at the choice in the last election and say, I want to go with what looks to me like the easy ride, where the government will take care of me, and we'll get free medical care, we'll get free health care. I think we should also have free motorcycles, because then you'll have more need for health care. But we'll see. But that wasn't on offer in the last election, so that's a bit of a problem. But if that is the case, if it is the case that this last election does signify something important in terms of the culture and the society, which I think is an open question, I won't assume it's the case. But let's just, for the sake of argument, consider that. What is the real problem? Where is this coming from? Where is this attitude, this spirit of dependency coming from, this desire for dependency? I would say it's the education system. The system of education in the United States is broken. It is absolutely wretched. The fact of the matter is that we have a system of public schools designed and administered by government. Designed and administered by government, not just paid for, but designed and administered by government. Whom would you imagine those schools would serve? Are they there to serve you? They're there to serve the interests of the state, serve the interests of the government. Now, there's a fascinating quote by the Christian thinker J. Gresham Machen in his book Christianity and Liberalism of 1923, and back then liberalism was a good word. Let me quote you what Machen said. A public school system, if it means the providing of free education for those who desire it, is a noteworthy and beneficent achievement of modern times. But when once it becomes monopolistic, it is the most perfect instrument of tyranny which has yet been devised. Freedom of thought in the Middle Ages was corroborated by the Inquisition, but the modern method is far more effective. Freedom of thought in the Middle Ages was corrupted by the Inquisition, but the modern method is far more effective. Place the lives of children in their formative years, despite the convictions of their parents, under the intimate control of experts appointed by the state. Force them then to attend schools where the higher aspirations of humanity are crushed out, and where the mind is filled with the materialism of the day. And it is difficult to see how even the remnants of liberty can subsist. Such a tyranny, supported as it is by a perverse technique used as the instrument in destroying human souls, is certainly far more dangerous than the crude tyrannies of the past, which, despite their weapons of fire and sword, permitted thought at least to be free. Now, that was Machen. Frank Meyer, whom I mentioned earlier, put it much more simply. He said, public schools are an abomination because their purpose is to serve the interest of the state. This was one of the founders of National Review. I don't know if they would endorse that today, but I will. David Glartner, who is a terrific writer on political and social issues, agrees. He wrote the book America Light, which came out toward the end of last year. And in this book, he basically talked about the problems that we've been talking about today, alluding to the culture of dependency in particular, and the sense that the nation has lost its way, that it's not the nation it was a few decades ago. And Glartner said he has a one-point, I'm quoting now, a one-point program for curing America. One, American education is in the hands of liberal airheads. Take it away from them. And he has a one-point plan for accomplishing this. Quote, focus on internet education. And he has an exclamation point there, so you know that he really means it. I think Glartner is absolutely right, but I think he's falling a bit short in the sense that internet education is certainly one way of breaking the monopoly that Machen referred to. Because when you have a monopoly on thinking, you have an incredible power that is given to those who have that monopoly. When you have a monopoly on thinking that's owned by the government, you have an incredible possibility of tyranny. So, and if you look at it, think about the way the Obama administration has gone about their education efforts. They took money and said, okay, we take this money from the taxpayers, and we're going to give it back to the states provided they go for Race to the Top. Well, so among the things you have to do for Race to the Top is you have to adopt the Common Core standards, which are curriculum standards, national curriculum standards, which were quote-unquote developed by private sector firms. It was, in fact, mostly led by the Bill Gates Foundation, but it's entirely a statist, big government idea. And the Obama administration, on top of that, is pressing for universal preschool. Now, I think everybody would say, universal preschool, that's wonderful. I can go to work, I can make some money, and I can just put my kids in a lovely place where they will learn all about life and get a head start. Oh, that's a great name for it, too. Get a head start on those rotten, neighbor kids down the road. And that's brilliant. But what is it really doing? If it's giving it over to the government, now what we're saying is, requiring kids to go to government schools and requiring people to pay for them is not enough to start at age 5 or 6. We have to have full-day kindergarten. That was the first part of it. A couple of years ago, that started up. So now everybody has full-day kindergarten because, of course, now we don't have to watch our kids those 3 hours. Sweet. Another year of a half a day free. Well, that wasn't enough, though. So now we're going to have the kids given over to the government at age 3 or 4. Now, this puts tremendous power in the hands of the government. That's really what it does. And if you look at it, it's really quite brilliant on the part of the Obama administration to do these things. It really is. Because if, as we all know, Obamacare is going to cost a fortune. As we all know, the taxes are continuing to rise. The economy is a disaster. It's very weak. So if you can at least indoctrinate people into thinking, well, this is normal, this is good, and start the younger you can, the better, then you have taken over. Well, there was a documentary, and I'm going to close with this. There was a documentary in 1968 called High School by an absolutely brilliant documentarian named Frederick Wiseman. This was incredibly influential. The Wiseman really bought into the John Dewey theories of education. Go look that up on Wikipedia when you get home if you're not too familiar with Dewey. But Dewey was a progressive thinker. So all that you have heard about progressive education, you can thank John Dewey for that and his followers. Wiseman did this absolutely terrific film in which he films life at a Philadelphia high school. And it depicts this awful repression. It's an upper middle class high school. And it's just absolutely terrible. The school's culture of discipline and personal responsibility. This is, the 1960s, so the younger people among you won't know this, but back then there was a strong kind of conservative element to American society, but it was definitely being dug up in some ways by more progressive thinking. And so you would have situations like this school where it's an old-fashioned kind of thinking where personal responsibility and discipline are shown as leading to success. But in Wiseman's film, it leads to mindless conformity. And he uses documentary tricks just beautifully. While the teachers are disciplining the kids, he shows an extreme close-up of their mouth, and then when they have the kids sitting in the classroom listening to Simon and Garfunkel with their younger teacher. Again, you young people, what is a Simon and Garfunkel? We'll explain later. But it was hip back then. And so the young hip teachers, it's all gauzy. It's like, oh, it's so pretty. And so they're doing this Dewey-style classroom, and everything is presented. And the brilliant thing about this is it all looks to a naive viewer as if, well, this is just pure documentary. This is just showing reality. When in fact, Wiseman is brilliantly manipulating the viewer. And what's brilliant about it is it makes it so hard to see. There's a scene in which they're talking about the rules for prom. And they're telling you, well, you can't wear that because your cuffs are too low. And the girls, no, that's going to be a 1/4 inch too high, and so on and so forth. And they're mocked. They're just mocking the sense of discipline. And the old teachers are constantly shown through visual and audio manipulation as being ugly and evil. And the young teachers are good and charming and sweet. And the film was admired for its intense realism, which is just delightful. It just makes its point so obvious. And I guess that's why progressives like it, is that this high school is not an environment designed as a place for children to learn knowledge and skills, but it's a place where they learn to conform, to fit into the role that society chooses for them. And this goes back to what Gramsci was talking about, that's what the culture and education do. So discipline is depicted as sinister, malignant, and unjustly administered. And it's administered according to the student's social class and the teachers and administrators' expectations. Oh, this is a smart kid. We'll give him good work to do. This is not so smart. We're not going to press him. And so you have the tyranny of low expectations going on there. I'll give you a dialogue exchange from the film. There's a male authority figure in there, and he says, "It's nice to be individualistic, but there are certain places to be individualistic." And the female student says, "I didn't mean to be individualistic." And the male authority figure says, "No, I'm not criticizing." But the end of the film, to me, says it all. One of the teachers has a letter from a former student who's now serving in Vietnam, and he reads this letter to the class, and they show the teacher. It's one of the oldies, so he's kind of dorky looking with the what do you call it, the glasses with the horn rims on the top. And that's a sure sign of evil, of course. So, but the letter, he thanks the teacher and the school for preparing him for the rigors of the life he's facing in Vietnam. He's writing this letter from Vietnam. He says that even though he's scared, he knows that everything he's learned in the school has prepared him for what he now has to do. As the teacher reads the letter, he has a very self-satisfied expression on his unattractive face. The young man's admiration is depicted in the film as a chilling and horrifying result of this stultifying conformist disciplinary code. He's become a mindless killing zombie. And that's, earlier in the film, they showed kids saying that they're against the Vietnam War. And again, they used the film techniques to make it clear, oh, these are the bright kids. These are the smart and wonderful kids. But what does this ending really tell us? Wiseman meant it to tell us something, and we know it, that he meant it to tell us that teaching kids conformity is, and disciplining them and teaching them knowledge instead of to learn is evil. And yet, the student who was subjected to strong discipline and subjected to a system in which you got grades according to what you learned developed strength of character. He's in Vietnam, he's afraid. Yet he has confidence that whatever comes, he can deal with. The school trained him to serve the interests of the state. There's no question about that. That's true. That's what Wiseman is saying. But those interests were seen as in developing strong character and skills and knowledge. And that served the students' interests. That served society's interests. That served their neighbors' interests. Making good people, strong people was a good thing. And so those who admired Wiseman's film, though, they took the opposite point of view. And they saw and they thought that breaking down discipline in schools and having the students all sit in whatever way they want to move the chairs and something, well, that's good, they'll learn to learn that way. But this approach served the state even more effectively, if you think about it. Because what does the state get now? It's get children who grow up to be adults. Look around you see it on the news all the time. Lack of self-discipline, lack of a sense of personal responsibility, poor knowledge. We're falling way behind the rest of the world in our educational achievement, way behind. And overall, a decreased ability to take care of ourselves. And even now, as if the last elections are telling us the truth, a decreased desire to take care of ourselves. If you think about it, the schools of our day seem perfectly designed to turn people into wards of the state. Values matter. Schools matter above all in inculcating values. The only thing that's more important is parents and the churches and those elements of the life that the family brings to the kids. But the schools really make a difference. I think that the culture is good. The culture is doing just fine. But the schools are absolutely distorting and ruining our nation. We must take them away from the state and give them to the people. Thank you.